G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today of course we are here to preview round 13. So some big games coming up, but of course a lot of teams have really separated themselves from contenders, or at least finals contenders, to teams that will most likely not be making the 8 this year. So we're going to cover 4 games as we usually do for the preview, the real big games coming up. So first of all, we're going to be starting with the Friday night contest, the Crows up against Brisbane at Adelaide Oval. What a game this is going to be. Last year when these two teams played off at Adelaide Oval, it was a draw. But this was when the Lions weren't really at their best, and the Crows, well, they were nowhere near it last year. As we know, they finished in the bottom 4 and really only had a decent month of football around July or August. So this was a pretty decent game of football considering how both teams were going. But Brisbane over the last few weeks have been a bit shaky. They had a good performance against Hawthorn a fortnight ago, but either side of that game, they lost a winnable game against the Demons, and their game against Essendon, they should have absolutely poleaxed them after a really dominant first term, but they let Essendon get back into the game and arguably had a chance to win it in that last quarter before a couple of really good performances from Lions players got them over the line. So Lions aren't in the greatest of form, while the Crows are coming off one of their best wins, under Matthew Nicks, I would say. They absolutely dismantled Sydney. We even heard Wayne Miller after the game saying that the Swans are a rabble. I don't know why they apologised for that, because I, as a Swans fan, watched that and thought, wow, this is a rabble of a performance. So I don't know why they apologised for that. So I think what really sets this game apart, in my opinion, is going to be the defence of the Crows. Over the last 6 to 7 weeks, not only have they been lethal up forward, but they have been brick walls in defence. They barely concede score. Now, obviously, last week against the Swans, it was very easy because the Swans couldn't penetrate forward anyway, but they still only conceded 31 points. And over the last month and a half, they have been so hard to score against, which I think is going to be a big reason why I'm tipping the Crows in this game. I think the Crows are going to be way too hard to score against, and on the other side of it, the Crows are always going to be lethal up forward. Looking at the matchups, I think they match up really nicely, the Crows defenders on the Brisbane forwards. You got Worrell, most likely goes to Rayner when he drifts forward. I think Keane will probably go to Morris, and then that probably leaves Butts to go to Hipwood, I'd say that. And Michael Annie takes the big job on Charlie Cameron, and then they could raffle a couple other defenders on a couple of the other forwards that are drifting throughout the game. And I also think the Crows being so dangerous up forward, it doesn't allow Harris Andrews to play his intercept game that he wants to play. Harris Andrews has no time to pick any sort of player in that Crows forward line that he could just sit on and then drift off of. If you're looking at Keys can damage you so badly on the offense. All the tall forwards for the Crows can kick goals. What's he going to do it on Taylor Walker? Taylor Walker gets off the chain. He can kick 3 or 4 as well. So the fact this is at Adelaide Oval as well, the Lions, I don't think have really been great the last 3 weeks or so. And the Crows probably one of the best teams in the competition right now, probably behind the Gold Coast and Collingwood. So right now the Crows are in really hot form. However, my brother's picking a bit of a surprising one in my opinion. He is going with Brisbane. He says that the Lions have a pretty decent record at Adelaide, and the Crows coming off a 6-day break, also flying from Sydney, maybe a bit tough. The Lions are coming off an 8-day break, and Brisbane should win the midfield battle. And finally, the Crows have only been able to beat one top 8 team so far this year. So that is a real concern for Adelaide, but I think that's not going to matter. I think the Crows will win. So next up, we move to Saturday's contest between the Tigers and the Swans. What an interesting game this is going to be. Not really so much on finals ramifications, but both of these teams would probably go into this game thinking they can win it. Now, the Tigers coming off a very tough loss against the Giants last week after leading all day, just couldn't get it done in the final quarter, while Sydney are coming off one of the most embarrassing performances I've seen as a Swans fan in some time. Probably the worst I've actually seen. So I think McCartan probably goes to Tom Lynch to try and lock him down, and then you got all the other defenders will probably take on the younger Tigers forward line. But I think the big talking point here is going to be the midfield battle. The Tigers midfield up against the Swans. I think the Tigers midfielders have done really well so far this year, to be honest. So I think that they can match up pretty nicely against the Swans, who have been very poor so far this year. We've had a couple of moments from Heaney, a couple of moments from Warner in games so far for the Swans, but they just haven't been consistent, and I don't know if I can rely on them to just carry the Swans here, because I think they're going to have to. I think the Swans will respond. I think after 2 dismal weeks at the footy, I think they have to respond. So on trust and the fact that this is at the MCG, I'm going to be picking the Tigers. I think the Tigers forward line is more likely to kick a winning score than the Sydney Swans forward line. And I think the Swans, considering the Swans have had basically no game plan, it seems, from the start of the season, unless they can pull something out in the next 5 or 6 days, I really can't see them winning this game. I think the Tigers have shown throughout the year that they will fight in every single game, and I think they should go into this one as favourites. Now, I think the Swans will go into favourites on the betting and all that sort of stuff because they just have that history over the past few years of being a good side. However, I would be picking the Tigers 100%, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's 50-50 betting markets and all that going into the game. And my brother's also picking the Tigers as well. He said the Swans have only won one of their last 3 games in Victoria. Richmond have beaten the Swans on the last 2 games at the MCG as well. Bolter coming back should bolster their defence, and he trusts the Richmond's defence over the Swans forward line, which I kind of alluded to as well. Next game we get to is the Cats up against the Gold Coast Suns, a massive game in the context of the top 4 battle. Now, Geelong have been a little bit inconsistent this season so far, in my opinion. If it wasn't for a few moments of heroics from some of their best players like Bailey Smith, Jeremy Cameron and Patrick Dangerfield earlier in the year, I think they'd probably be worse off. However, looking at it though, the Cats have been banking up wins, and I think majority of us know that the Cats are definitely a second half of the season kind of team. They really rock it up when the finals are coming. So they continue to bank up wins. They're at 5th right now. They have a pretty nice record going into the rest of the year. So I think the Cats are just starting to prime themselves for the rest of the year. But the Gold Coast did have a shock loss last week versus Fremantle, and I think they will look to respond. A game up at home, they should have won that game. They should have won that game going into it, but the Dockers were just stronger over the footy when the conditions got tough. The main reason here why I'm going to be picking the Cats is because it's down in Geelong. The Gold Coast have never won down at the Cattery, and I really can't see them winning it here either. Jeremy Cameron in the last few weeks has hit red hot form, and I think the Gold Coast could cover him, but I think that him, Brian Myers, Stengel started to get into a little bit of form as well. I think the Cats can kick a winning score here, and down in Geelong, I just think it's going to be too tough for the Suns. My brother has also picked the Cats as well. He said the Cats should be too strong down at home. The Gold Coast have never been able to win down there, and Geelong have been better against top 8 sides so far this year. In fact, they've actually been the best team so far this year at beating top 8 sides. So the Cats at the Cattery against the top 8 team, I think they should get this one done. So the final game I want to take a deep dive into is the Big Freeze game, of course, Monday. King's birthday clash between the Demons and the Pies. Now, Melbourne are coming off a very bad loss last week against the Saints, and they really just kicked themselves out of it. They had 28 scoring shots and still lost the game. Simply isn't good enough. However, the fact that they still generated 28 shots at goal shows me that I think they're actually a little bit of a sneaky chance. Coming off an 8-day break, they should recover well from the NT travel, and also think that Christian Petrarca, returning to the place where his season ended last year, I think he's in for a massive contest. But looking at the Pies though, coming off their win against the Hawks last week, it may well have been their best game of the year so far. It was such a complete performance. I think it's pretty difficult to pick against them in any tip at the moment. I don't think I've tipped against them so far this year, and I won't be doing it here either. Because they are really leaps and bounds in front of any other team in the competition, I just can't pick anyone else against them at the moment. However, I just have an inkling that this could be a bit of a danger game for the Pies. I think if they don't perform at their best, there could be a sneaky chance for the Demons, but to reiterate, I'm picking the Pies. My brother is doing the same. He said the Pies have won the last 3 games against the Demons. Collingwood won their past 4 games this year, so he trusts the Collingwood defence over the D's forward line. So with that being said, guys, let's get to our full tips for round 13. So my tips are the Bulldogs to beat the Hawks, the Crows to beat the Lions, the Tigers to beat the Swans, the Cats to beat the Gold Coast Suns, the Giants to beat Port Adelaide, the West Coast Eagles to beat North Melbourne, Carlton to beat Essendon, and the Pies to beat the Demons. And my brother's tips for round 13 are the Dogs to beat the Hawks, the Lions to beat the Crows, the Tigers to beat the Swans, the Cats to beat the Gold Coast Suns, Giants to beat Port Adelaide, North Melbourne to beat West Coast, Carlton to beat Essendon, and Collingwood to beat the Demons. Let's get to our certainty tips for this week. So my brother got to pick first this week. He has gone with the Dogs to beat Hawthorn. Of course, the Dogs losing their last match against the Cats. And my certainty tip is the Tigers to beat the Swans. Of course, the Tigers losing to the Giants last week. But finally, guys, let's get to our AFL tipping ladder, of course, for the channel. Leviticus still has a commanding lead on top, leading 6 tips in front of the boy from SNB. 83 to Leviticus, 77 to the boy from SNB. Both of them are using their joker. Ethan Sports still keeping in the hunt. He's 9 tips behind Leviticus, though, so it's going to be extremely tough to catch up to him. I know he's used his joker as well. Looking at me and my brother has used his joker. He is equal with me on 69 tips. So look, looking at it, he'd be like, yeah, I'm pretty good, whatever. No, I've still got my joker. I am 14 behind Leviticus. I still think I can make a charge. I went for a roughie last week, and it was stupid. I picked the Swans over the Crows. What was I thinking? The Swans obviously suck. But this week I've gone pretty safe, I think. I think there's a couple of games that I could have gone with a bit of a roughie. I think the West Coast Eagles against North Melbourne's a bit of a rough one. I'm going with the Eagles in WA. That's just my little feeling there. So could be a bit of a tough decision. Maybe a wrong one. I think that I'm going to be back in the Eagles over the last couple of weeks. They've done some really good performances. But That's pretty much all we've got for this episode of the preview, guys. Of course, for round 13, make sure to let me know down below your tips going into this round. And also, I think we should start something up in the comment section as well. Maybe pick your biggest upset for the round. If you think there's a big upset coming, make sure to let me know down below. Maybe leave a little bit of a reasoning as to why, because I've got to make a late charge for this tipping. So if you guys can convince me on a roughy pick, then maybe I'll take your advice if you guys can convince me more. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching this episode of the preview. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. But for now, we'll catch you all in the next one.